1. The stepmother's slip in the locked door. Call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day that felt ordinary until the phone lit up with my stepmother Veronica's name. I answered, already braced for the usual frostiness, but what I got was a tone that was falsely sweet, an oily veneer over something sharp. "Hello, darling. Just calling to let you know your father is resting comfortably. We've had to make a few minor adjustments here at the house to accommodate his care. Nothing for you to worry your pretty little head over." The word adjustments hung in the air, sickeningly vague and immediately suspect. It was the careful way she emphasized it, the way a predator purrs before sinking its teeth in. I pressed her. "What kind of adjustments, Veronica? Is Dad okay? I haven't been able to reach him since last week." Her voice hardened, the sweetness instantly dissolving into brittle steel. "He needs his rest, and frankly, so do I. He's going to be just fine. But access to the house is going to be restricted for a while. We've changed the system to a digital keypad for security." She paused, allowing the implication to land heavily. "You don't have the code. Don't worry, I'll let you know when it's appropriate to visit." My blood ran cold. I immediately drove to the familiar blue stone house, the house where I grew up, named for the striking irregular slate used on the chimney. When I arrived, the air was thick with a silence that felt wrong. Key I'd carried for 20 years scraped uselessly against the new, sleek black digital lockbox screwed into the doorframe. My key was dead. I tried the back door, then the sliding glass door to the sunroom, only to find the same brutal technological rejection. Veronica had physically locked me out of my own father's life. Panic seized me, the kind that steals breath and clarity. I hammered on the front door, shouting my father's name. "Dad! It's me. Are you okay?" A curtain twitched in the upstairs window, and a moment later Veronica appeared, opening the door only wide enough for her face to register cold fury. "You need to leave immediately. You are disturbing your father. I warned you about access." Before I could even frame a coherent question, she snatched up her cell phone and took 2 deliberate steps back inside. "I am calling the police right now," she hissed, her voice low but carrying the metallic edge of genuine threat. "You are trespassing, violating the terms of the restraining order I filed this morning. If you are not off my property in 60 seconds, you will be arrested." The shock was a physical blow. A restraining order? It was a vicious, fabricated weapon, an instant and effective blockade designed to leverage law enforcement to keep me away from my father. I could hear the panicked thumping of my own heart as I backed away, watching the front door click shut. I didn't wait for the siren. I couldn't risk arrest. I drove to the end of Bluebell Lane and watched the blue and red lights arrive, 2 minutes later, parking directly in front of the house. I saw the officer speak to Veronica, who stood on the porch with an air of wrong dignity, pointing toward my direction. I was forced to drive away, the image of my childhood home guarded by a police cruiser and locked by a heartless woman, seared into my mind. Casual, dismissive phone call had become a full-scale legal and emotional ambush. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for the last sliver of time I had left with my father, and the clock had just started ticking backward. The sickening reality of her plot had solidified. This wasn't about care, it was about complete control, and she was prepared to use every legal and procedural trick in the book, starting with the police calls, to establish it. I felt utterly alone, staring down the barrel of a legal system weaponized against me. I knew then that my counterattack had to be just as swift and merciless. I needed the original will, and I needed it yesterday. 2. The original intent and the auction block. The terror of the police encounter fueled a cold, manic energy. I couldn't go back to the house, but I needed documents. Specifically, I needed the original will, the one drafted years ago after my mother's passing, which guaranteed me and my sister half of the estate, including the blue stone house itself, regardless of any subsequent marriage. That document, I believed, was my nuclear defense against Veronica's adjustments. I raced to the one place it might still be, my old attorney's office. "Mr. Davies, a man whose glasses perpetually sat halfway down his nose, looked at me with genuine sympathy as I frantically recounted the locked doors and the police threat. "We have copies, of course," he said, pulling a yellowed file. "But the original was retrieved by your father several months ago. He said he wanted to review his estate planning. I assumed he put it in the safe deposit box or maybe the fireproof lockbox at the house." That single casual statement, retrieved by your father, felt like a physical punch. Veronica now had control of the original, meaning she was free to destroy it and replace it with her own fabricated version. I left Davy's office and sat in my car, staring at the copy of the will, a useless piece of paper without the original. I was legally exposed. My anxiety spiked again that evening when I ran the property records for the Blue Stone house, a habit I'd adopted since the locks were changed. The house had always been my family's most stable asset. But under the property listing, a new entry made my stomach drop. Pending review for quick sale/auction. I called the listing agent, feigning casual interest, and the agent, oblivious to the drama, cheerily confirmed that the property was being readied for a surprise sale to expedite a family relocation, with a closing window open within the next 30 days. Veronica wasn't just rewriting the will, she was liquidating the primary asset while my father was incapacitated and while I was legally blocked from entering the grounds. Once the house was sold, the cash would disappear into accounts I couldn't trace, and the legal fight would become impossible. I drove back to the perimeter of the estate, parking 3 streets over where I could still see the roof of the Blue Stone house. I felt a crushing sense of powerlessness, watching the property that defined my history about to be snatched away. I spent hours there, staring through the gloom, watching the kitchen light where Veronica moved like a spider preparing its web. I had to find a way to stop that sale. Called Davies back. "We have to file an immediate motion for an injunction," I stated, my voice tight. "She's selling the house. She'll hide the cash." Davies sighed, his voice heavy with caution. "Without a medical declaration of your father's incapacity or proof of fraud, an injunction is an uphill battle, expensive and slow. We need the evidence first. You need to see your father, and right now she has a police order blocking you." The conversation ended with a terrible finality. The law was a machine that required fuel in the form of evidence, and I had none. Veronica's plan was clear: lock me out, sell the asset, falsify the documents, and leave me with nothing but a worthless copy of an old will. The race was now desperately close, with the finish line being the closing table for the house sale. I had to find a way back in, or at least get a pair of eyes on my father, and I had to do it before the deed was signed. The thought of losing not just the inheritance but the very place where my father existed galvanized my resolve into something unbreakable.
Subscribe with us now and stay connected as we journey through every chapter together. Now back to our story.
3. The test of capacity versus Guard. The legal advice from Mr. Davies was terrifyingly clear. To challenge Veronica's control, the very first thing I needed was an independent medical assessment of my father's cognitive decline. Without a certified declaration of his diminished capacity, every document he signed, every lock she changed, and every action she took could be defended as his choice. The urgency was palpable. If she managed to get a new, notarized will signed while he was still medically deemed capable, the legal fees alone could bankrupt me before the case even went to court. I reached out to a geriatric specialist, Dr. Elena Ramos, who agreed that the evidence I presented, the rapid, unusual change in estate affairs and the sudden isolation, warranted an immediate assessment. The fee was astronomical, but the alternative was ruin. The challenge wasn't paying the fee, it was getting Dr. Ramos through the front door. Veronica's police-enforced restraining order was one barrier, but the corrupt HOA involvement presented another, more insidious layer of defense. Bluebell Gardens was a community where appearance was everything, and Veronica, as a founding resident and a frequent donor to the association's beautification fund, was deeply integrated into the local power structure. Current HOA president Mr. Gordon had always been friendly with Veronica, and I suspected her influence was heavy. Called Mr. Gordon explained the situation with my father's health and requested access for the medical team, emphasizing that this was a welfare check, not a personal dispute. Mr. Gordon's response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic stonewalling. His voice was smooth, overly polite, and utterly impenetrable. I understand your concern for your father, but Mrs. Sinclair is the primary caregiver and the designated primary resident. Any visitation must be scheduled through her. Furthermore, the association cannot interfere with domestic affairs or judicial mandates, which, as you know, include the current restraining order. He used the word mandate like a shield, suggesting my attempt to access the home was a breach of civic duty. He went further, noting that the HOA had received a specific security request from Veronica's attorney to restrict unusual traffic, including third-party medical professionals, until a full security review was complete. The HOA, the very organization meant to enforce community standards, was now acting as Veronica's personal guard force, using its petty rules and regulations to block a necessary medical evaluation. I felt a surge of cold fury. I drove Dr. Ramos to the entrance of Bluebell Gardens and tried to explain the situation to the community security guard. The guard, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, simply pointed to a list taped inside his booth. "I'm sorry, sir. Mrs. Sinclair's vehicle is the only non-emergency vehicle authorized this week for that address. No medical vans, no unmarked sedans. I have my orders from the board." The HOA guard was the final, pathetic obstacle, a human roadblock enforced by community fees. Dr. Ramos, an experienced professional, saw the situation clearly. "This isn't typical family friction," she observed, her eyes sharp. "This is calculated isolation. They are deliberately denying access to prevent an unfavorable assessment. We have to document this denial every single time because in court it translates into evidence of undue influence." We spent the afternoon documenting the denial, taking time-stamped photos of the security gate, writing down the guard's name, and drafting a formal, certified letter to the HOA demanding immediate access. The test of capacity had become a fight not just against Veronica, but against a whole system of small-town corruption she had manipulated. I realized then that I could never defeat her with mere phone calls. I needed proof that was impossible to deny, proof that she herself would generate. The only way to win was to become a ghost inside the blue stone house. For the undue influence timeline and the digital spy. The systemic failures of the police and the corrupt HOA involvement made one thing perfectly clear. I could not rely on external institutions to grant me access or deliver justice. If I wanted to save my father and the estate, I had to generate my own evidence. The idea of planting a recording device was terrifying, fraught with legal risk, but the alternative, allowing Veronica to sell the house and disappear with the funds, was worse. My desperation was now a survival instinct. I began the shadow operation. My first move was to create the undue influence timeline. I meticulously logged every event since the start of my father's health decline. The date Veronica fired the longtime physical therapist, the 2 weeks she spent vacationing while a minimally trained acquaintance provided minimal care, the sudden sale of my father's beloved classic car, a sale she claimed he insisted on, and now the changed locks and the fake restraining order. Each entry was cross-referenced with public records or third-party confirmations. The timeline was the legal scaffolding, the secret recordings would be the bricks. The challenge of placing the devices was immense. I couldn't breach the house, but I needed audio that captured the interactions between my father and Veronica. I realized the only way was through third-party delivery. I ordered a high-end air purifier online, one that I knew would be delivered directly to the front door by a courier who wouldn't be stopped by the HOA guard. Inside the purifier's base, I carefully tucked 2 tiny, long-life encrypted recording units. The devices were placed in separate plastic bags to prevent contamination and noise. The air purifier was heavy, designed to stand inconspicuously in a corner. The gamble was that Veronica, with her obsession for cleanliness, would accept the package without suspicion and place it somewhere central in the house, ideally near the main living area or my father's bedroom. The delivery confirmation email was agonizing. Then came the terrifying multi-day wait. Every passing hour increased the chance of discovery, but every passing hour also meant potential audio evidence was being logged. After 4 days, I made the call. I needed to retrieve the evidence. I couldn't risk the battery dying. I engineered the retrieval with the same cunning as the placement. I called Veronica from a burner phone, using a voice modulator to sound like a representative from the delivery company, stating that the expensive air purifier had been mistakenly shipped to her address and was meant for a different resident. I offered a $50 cash refund for the inconvenience and arranged for a pickup immediately. I drove the burner phone courier, a friend I trusted implicitly dressed in a standard uniform, to the perimeter of the house. I watched from a distance as Veronica, eager for the quick cash and annoyed by the error, reluctantly handed the heavy box to the courier on the porch. The exchange took less than a minute. Back in my car, my hands shaking, I opened the air purifier. The 2 recording devices were still running, their tiny green lights blinking steadily. I had the files. I had become the digital spy, and now I had the chilling proof of life, or rather proof of abuse, that only a ghost inside the house could provide. The true test, however, was in the listening.
Let's stay connected. Subscribe and join me on this journey every step of the way.
5. The witness to coercion and the fake narrative. The audio files from the air purifier were horrific. They revealed a pattern of verbal abuse, emotional isolation, and calculated manipulation that went far beyond mere financial greed. My father, who had always been a booming, jovial presence, sounded frail and confused, his voice often barely a whisper. Veronica's tone, however, was loud, insistent, and always directed toward estate matters. In one damning clip, she could be heard coaching him on what to tell the next visiting doctor, clearly attempting to manage his presentation of competence. "Remember, dear, you love the new arrangement. It's what you want. Do you understand?" Coercion was audible, undeniable. With the audio locked away, I knew I needed a human witness who could testify to Veronica's methods without being related to me. Against all odds, the universe delivered. I received an unexpected email from Helen, my father's former caretaker, the one Veronica had abruptly dismissed months ago. Helen apologized for not reaching out sooner but explained she had been intimidated by Veronica's constant threats. Now, hearing about the restraining order and the rumored sale, she felt compelled to speak up. She described how Veronica would deliberately isolate my father before meetings with her own lawyer, how she would withhold medication if he argued with her financial decisions, and most critically, how Veronica would guide his hand when signing documents, claiming his tremor was acting up. Helen's testimony was the golden ticket, an unbiased, professional witness. But as soon as my lawyer, who I was now working with more closely, contacted Helen, Veronica deployed a new, vicious weapon: the social media smears. Within 24 hours, a new anonymous account at Justice for Dad, clearly run by Veronica or her associates, popped up on local neighborhood forums and several public social media platforms. The feed was filled with carefully curated images, pictures of Veronica smiling sweetly next to my father, who looked confused but outwardly fine. Captions painted a sickeningly false picture. "My brave father enduring the heartbreak of his daughter's sudden, cruel abandonment. She only wants his money. So sad to see family turn on itself. We are praying for her spiteful soul." Then came the targeted attack on Helen. Anonymous posts suggesting Helen had been fired for stealing prescription drugs, citing fake police reports and linking to old, unrelated disciplinary records from a previous job. The fake narrative was designed to preemptively poison the jury pool and discredit Helen before she ever reached the stand. I spent an agonizing evening looking at the comments. Neighbors I had known for years were piling on, believing Veronica's carefully manufactured facade. The smear campaign was sophisticated, calculated, and deeply painful, turning me into the villain. I forwarded the entire stream of malicious posts to my lawyer, recognizing the social media smears not just as personal attacks but as yet more evidence of Veronica's desperation and her deliberate attempt to obstruct justice. The smear campaign itself had just become another chapter in the undue influence timeline. The fight was no longer just in the probate court, it was raging across every platform, forcing me to contend with an entire fictionalized reality crafted by my stepmother. 6. The elder law litigator and the dossier. The initial attempts to find a lawyer had been deeply discouraging. The general practitioners I approached saw the complexity of the case, the restraining order, the HOA involvement, the lack of immediate access, and quickly dismissed me, citing the difficulty of obtaining evidence and the certainty of a protracted legal battle. I felt like I was constantly hitting dead ends, my frustration turning to despair. I was sinking under the weight of the injustice. Then a friend referred me to Amelia Vance, a litigator specializing in elder law and probate contests. Amelia's reputation was legendary, sharp, relentless, and possessing an almost clinical aversion to injustice. Her office, tucked away in a downtown high-rise, was devoid of the comforting clutter of local firms. It was all glass, steel, and a terrifyingly efficient silence. I walked into her office carrying the fully compiled dossier. It was thick, a binder containing everything: the original useless copy of the will, the police reports confirming Veronica's fake restraining order, the certified letters documenting the HOA's complicity in blocking Dr. Ramos, the printouts of the anonymous social media smears, and most crucially the transcripts of the secret recordings from the air purifier, along with the raw audio files. I placed the binder on her desk, the weight of the evidence feeling immense. Amelia didn't rush. She spent an hour reviewing the dossier in complete silence, occasionally making a note with a fine-tipped pen. When she reached the section detailing the stepmother's coaching and the documented threat to withhold medication, she finally looked up, her expression a mix of professional outrage and icy determination. "This is not a simple family squabble over money," Amelia stated, her voice low and powerful. "This is a clear-cut case of financial elder abuse under the cloak of a spousal relationship. Pattern of isolation, the changed locks, the police calls, the corrupt HOA involvement, combined with the contemporaneous audio is what seals it. You have proof that the actions were not only self-serving but actively coercive and directly tied to the creation of the fake wills." She outlined her strategy. First, we would depose the solicitor who drafted the new challenged will. "The solicitor's testimony is key," Amelia explained, leaning forward. "He will claim he found your father competent. We will force him to explain why, if your father was competent, the stepmother felt the need to coach him on what to say, and why she went to such extreme lengths to isolate him from his children and independent medical review. The secret recordings would not just invalidate Veronica, they would call the solicitor's ethics into question, making him a potential co-conspirator. Second, the house sale had to be stopped immediately. The moment that house closes, the money vanishes, and we lose leverage. We file a petition for interlocutory injunction today, seeking an emergency temporary restraining order on the property." Amelia told me the criteria were tough. We had to demonstrate a high probability of success on the merits and irreparable harm. Our evidence, the imminent surprise sale combined with the audio of the coercion, was our only shot. Leaving Amelia's office that day, I didn't feel relief, but I felt a powerful, stabilizing sense of direction. I had traded my emotional despair for a legal strategy, and I had found a champion who saw the full scope of Veronica's malice. Character count of the dossier had purchased me a fighting chance, transforming my fear into a weapon. Now we had to wait for the system to react, knowing Veronica would fight us on every syllable. My fate and my father's now rested on the speed of the court. 7. The solicitor's ethics and the voided document. The deposition of Mr. Edgar Finch, the solicitor Veronica had hired to draft the final damning document, was scheduled for the following week. I sat beside Amelia Vance, feeling an unnerving combination of nerves and righteousness. Finch was exactly what I expected. A man in his late 50s, pale, sweating slightly, and radiating the self-important air of someone trying desperately to cling to professional competence while knowing he was caught in a dangerous ethical gray area. Amelia didn't start with the fake will itself. She started with the timeline of isolation. She presented the evidence in a cold, chronological barrage. The changed locks on the home, the police calls against me, the formal letters documenting the corrupt HOA involvement in blocking the medical examiner. She asked Finch simple, impossible questions. Mr. Finch, if your client, the testator, was fully competent and wanted to meet with you, why did his wife need to file a police report against his own daughter, his only other surviving heir, to ensure she couldn't access the home where the meeting took place? Finch stammered, offering weak excuses about client-side security concerns. Then came the centerpiece, the secret recordings. Amelia played the most damaging clip, the one where Veronica coached my father on what to say about his intentions, instructing him to use specific legal terminology that he clearly didn't understand. The recording filled the small conference room with Veronica's aggressive, controlling voice and my father's frail, confused responses. Mr. Finch, Amelia said, her voice quiet but devastatingly authoritative. The audio recording you just heard was taken inside the Bluestone residence, 3 days before you notarized the new will. Did your professional intake, which includes assessing testamentary capacity, include verifying whether the testator's stated wishes were in fact his own or were they dictated to him by the sole beneficiary of that document? Finch finally cracked. He shifted in his chair, running a hand over his slicked-back hair. He admitted, under intense pressure, that Veronica had been highly involved in the drafting process, providing all the relevant financial information and scheduling all the appointments. He conceded that he had performed only a standard 15-minute capacity test, and that he had been unaware of the police calls or the ongoing domestic conflict. His defense was simple negligence, not conspiracy, but the damage was done. His testimony now confirmed that he had effectively allowed Veronica to create the impression of a valid signature, regardless of the ethical warning signs screaming at him. The result of the deposition was that the new will, the one Veronica created to steal the inheritance, was now fundamentally challenged. Amelia informed me that Finch's testimony, combined with the audio, created an irrefutable presumption of undue influence. She wouldn't just argue the new will was invalid. She would argue it was voided by the fraudulent circumstances of its creation. The document was a nullity, a piece of paper poisoned by coercion. It was a huge, defining victory in the case, but the war wasn't over. The house, our biggest concern, was still marching toward the surprise sale, and we needed a judge to intervene immediately. Finch had crumbled, but Veronica was still standing. Ate the interlocutory injunction and the closing table. Closing date for the surprise sale of the Bluestone house was 2 days away. It was a forced timeline designed by Veronica's counsel to present the probate court with a fait accompli. House sold, funds dispersed, case closed. Pressure was immense. If the sale went through, the cash would be much harder to trace and recover than the physical property, making any future victory feel hollow. Amelia's filing for the interlocutory injunction was the Hail Mary pass. She argued that the imminent sale represented irreparable harm to the estate, and that the mountain of evidence, the secret recordings showing coercion, the social media smears proving malice, the corrupt HOA involvement showing isolation, and Finch's deposition confirming the suspicious creation of the fake wills, meant we had a high likelihood of winning the entire case. The emergency hearing was held on the morning before the scheduled closing. I sat in the courtroom, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles were white, staring at Veronica. She looked immaculate, dressed in a muted blue suit, projecting an image of stoic, wrong dignity. Her lawyer presented a case centered on property rights, claiming my father was merely selling an asset he no longer needed to provide for his care, and that the court interfering with a private sale was an extraordinary and unwarranted overreach. Amelia, however, was devastatingly precise. She didn't debate property law, she exposed the plot. She presented the undue influence timeline, moving seamlessly from the police calls enforcing isolation to the HOA blocking medical access. Then, she read the specific transcript from the secret recordings where Veronica pressured my father to sign the listing agreement for the surprise sale, the document itself. Your Honor, Amelia concluded, this sale is not an act of property management. It is the final, desperate act of a predator attempting to liquidate her spoils before her fraud is fully exposed. Deny this injunction, and the court will be complicit in the theft of an elderly man's estate, leaving my client with nothing but dust. The judge, a formidable woman with an air of profound weariness, took a deep breath. She didn't look at Veronica or her lawyer. She looked at the dossier. After a silence that stretched for an eternity, she spoke. The court has reviewed the evidence of coercion presented, specifically the audio exhibits and the documented isolation tactics. Plaintiff has met the burden of showing probable success on the merits. The sale of the property at Bluestone is hereby stayed. An interlocutory injunction is granted, effective immediately. Title company is ordered to cease all activity on this property. Closing table is indefinitely suspended. The relief that washed over me was so intense it felt like physical pain. Veronica's composure finally fractured. She shot me a look of pure, concentrated hatred that promised an apocalypse. But her lawyer restrained her, whispering frantically in her ear. We had won the battle for the house, preventing the worst-case scenario. Property was safe. Clock was no longer racing but ticking slowly, patiently toward the final trial. The injunction had bought us time, leverage, and a huge psychological advantage, proving that the secret recordings and my relentless collection of evidence were powerful enough to stop a legal machinery built for speed and profit.
Subscribe with us now and stay connected as we journey through every chapter together. Now back to our story.
9. The showdown at the probate court. The final probate hearing was the ultimate confrontation, a full showdown at the probate court. Courtroom was packed. Family friends, curious neighbors who had seen the social media smears, and the witnesses who were now vital to my father's future. I felt the weight of every lost night's sleep, every desperate phone call, and every anxious character logged in the dossier. Amelia's presentation was masterful, weaving a narrative of isolation, manipulation, and greed. She started by calling Dr. Ramos, the geriatric specialist, who testified that the corrupt HOA involvement and the police calls had rendered her initial necessary evaluation impossible, but that her subsequent court-ordered visit showed undeniable evidence of advanced cognitive decline and extreme vulnerability to suggestion. Then came Helen, the former caretaker, who stood firm despite the earlier social media smears. Helen was a picture of honesty and quiet resilience. She detailed the physical coercion, describing how Veronica would physically guide my father's hand to ensure his signature looked normal, and how she would remove the keys from his desk, mirroring the later changed locks that sealed me out. The emotional high point, however, was the playing of the secret recordings. Amelia requested the courtroom lights be dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the sound system. The audio echoed through the room, Veronica's smooth voice turning sharp, insistent, demanding the specific legal phrasing, followed by my father's weak, confused demurrals. When the clip of Veronica threatening to withhold his pain medication if he didn't agree to sign the fake wills played, a collective gasp went through the gallery. It was undeniable, unedited proof of cruelty and financial abuse. Veronica's lawyer tried everything. He attacked the legality of the secret recordings, claiming they were inadmissible, but Amelia had established that state law permitted recording a conversation to which one party, my father, was technically present, though incapacitated. He argued the social media smears were unrelated opinion pieces and dismissed the corrupt HOA involvement as standard community regulations. But the visual evidence, the images of the digital lock and the police cars from the police calls, were already etched in the judge's mind. When Veronica took the stand, her composure finally evaporated under Amelia's surgical cross-examination. Pressed on the specific words she used in the audio, and unable to deny her own voice, she descended into a vicious, emotional tirade, railing against me and Helen, inadvertently confirming the very malice we had described. The judge retired for only 20 minutes, a shockingly short time, before returning to deliver the ruling. Her voice was steady, her expression grim. The court finds overwhelming contemporaneous evidence of undue influence exerted upon the testator by the respondent Veronica Sinclair. The pattern of isolation, the active attempts to obstruct medical and legal review, and the direct audible coaching recorded in the exhibits, all create a presumption of fraud that the respondent failed to rebut. The subsequent will, dated October 14th, is hereby voided. I closed my eyes, a rush of pure exhaustion and relief washing over me. The original will, the one that honored my mother's memory, was reinstated. The house was safe. Justice, though dearly bought, had arrived. I looked across the room at Veronica, who looked utterly defeated, staring at the shattered remains of her greedy plot. 10. The final accounting, justice and ruin. The judge's ruling was final, but the reality of the aftermath was anything but clean. The victory felt less like a celebration and more like the end of a long, punishing war. The final accounting of the estate was a slow, meticulous process, revealing the full extent of Veronica's 2-year spree. She had managed to drain nearly $500,000 through dubious expenditures, credit card fraud, and the attempted surprise sale of countless smaller, valuable assets. She was ultimately ordered to reimburse the estate, but the bulk of the money was likely gone forever. The most painful part was the realization that the fake wills and the whole malicious plot had completely eclipsed the last years of my father's life. When I was finally able to return to the blue stone house, using the old key after the changed locks were removed, the silence was deafening. My father was still there, but diminished, shielded from the fallout of the court case but also tragically disconnected from the world. He recognized me, a flicker of the old warmth in his eyes, but the man who had built this life and this house was effectively gone. Veronica, stripped of her position, dignity, and access to the funds, faced no criminal charges for the secret recordings, deemed permissible for evidentiary purposes in this civil case, or the police calls, dismissed as a domestic dispute, but the financial ruin was absolute. She was effectively disinherited and legally evicted from the house, moving to a small apartment across the state. The social media smears vanished almost instantly after the verdict, leaving only a trace of digital debris and a collective sense of neighborhood embarrassment. The corrupt HOA involvement was investigated, leading to the forced resignation of Mr. Gordon, a small, satisfying win of local justice. My sister and I received our rightful inheritance, the blue stone house, and the remaining assets under the original will. We had fought for justice and won. But the true cost was the ruin of any semblance of family. I realized that the fight had consumed so much of my mental and emotional energy that I hardly knew how to stop being a detective and start being a daughter again. I sat in the sunroom, looking out at the vast, empty lawn, holding my father's hand. We had saved the money, but the man and the family we knew was irrevocably broken. The blue stone chimney still stood strong, a beautiful monument to a former life, now tainted by the memories of coercion and betrayal. The victory felt profoundly heavy,